Henry in a pickle. Henry was in a pickle. It had all begun one day when he had heard Mouse chuckling as he went by. Chuckles can be sweet sounds that tug you into their mischief and merriment, but this chuckle somehow scraped Henry's ears like sandpaper and made him feel uneasy. As he made his way to the sunlit brook, he overheard Crow remarking that Henry's dark brown colouring wasn't very attractive, and he preferred light brown hedgehogs. That afternoon, Rabbit made a joke about the fact Henry only had 4 toes on his back feet, not 5. "Henry's always losing things," she had joked. "He's even careless with his toes." Somehow, these odd remarks had found their way inside Henry's head, and now they were going round and round in his thoughts and made him feel quite sick. He paused beside Lily Pad Pond and looked at himself in the water. Perhaps lighter brown hedgehogs did look better. As he looked more closely, he noticed the hair on his stomach had white flecks. He hadn't really noticed them before, and decided that they too weren't right. The longer he stayed brooding over his appearance, the more things he found were wrong. His spines were too short. His face had odd black blotches. His nose was too small. His snout too long. And his tail was an odd shape. All in all, he was a mess. "Oh, why don't I look like Ravi?" he grumbled. "Ravi looks just right." Well, it was true that his friend Ravi was a fine-looking hedgehog. Henry lay on his back, and a strange new feeling began to soak into him, like the dampness of grass on which he was lying. He was jealous. Why should Ravi have such long spines, a finely patterned face, soft brown fur on his stomach, a nose and snout exactly the right size, and the ideal tail? It was not fair, and it wasn't right that one hedgehog should have so much that looked good, while he had so much that looked bad. And so Henry worked himself more and more into his pickle. He grumbled about for over a week, and one afternoon decided he had had quite enough of being the ugly, laughed-at hedgehog. That night he made his spines longer, gluing pine needles to them, and painted them all light brown. He covered up the white flecks on his stomach. He squeezed his nose into an acorn cup to make it bigger. He put on socks with room for 5 toes and filled the 5th toe with grass. And he made a hole in an ideally shaped acorn and squeezed his tail into it. Very early in the morning, before even the sun had woken, he went back to the lily pad pond. As the sleepy sun opened her eyes and sunbeams played on the water, Henry couldn't believe his eyes. Who was this fine hedgehog that he could see, as handsome and as fine as his friend Ravi. As he sat, enjoying his reflection in the water, a strange new sensation began to soak into him, like the droplets of morning dew on which he was sitting. He was feeling vain. He looked so much better than the other hedgehogs of the forest. In fact, he was better than them, and they didn't realize it. Things were about to change. They should realize how lucky they were to have such a fine-looking hedgehog as a friend. It had rained overnight, and puddles of water gleamed like jewels along Henry's way home. At each one he could not help himself pausing and looking at his reflection, feeling a wave of pride. He was so preoccupied with his own good looks that he didn't hear Duck say, "Good morning," nor Woodpecker ask, "Are you well, my dear?" He did not notice Otter wave, or brown Rat wink. He was in a world of his own, in which only Henry existed, the centre of everything, the finest-looking hedgehog in the forest, well, even the country, and probably the world. During the next week, Henry busied around the forest, not actually doing anything, and not talking to anyone. He was just showing off how impressive he looked. He felt too handsome to stop to talk to his old friends, and too perfect to mix with animals that had flaws and blemishes. On the other hand, he did not want to mix with Ravi either, because he didn't want to share the attention he was getting. What he didn't realize was that everyone was watching him, not because they liked what they saw, but because they were shocked by the attitude of this conceited hedgehog who had just arrived in the forest, and they wanted to know where their Henry had gone. Badger was very worried and upset, and called for a special forest meeting that evening. All the animals gathered together, and Henry placed himself right in the middle of them, with his nose in the air, to indicate that he was doing the meeting a great honour by attending. Badger, looking very distressed, began. "Oh, dear friends, you will all know now that a terrible mishap has struck the forest. Our dear, much-loved friend Henry has gone missing. We have all been searching for him frantically, but to this day we have no news, and can only begin to fear the worst." At this, Badger stopped, as a big tear welled up in his eye and glided down his nose. It hung there like a crystal ball, into which the animals gazed, in case it might give them a clue as to Henry's whereabouts. Henry was very confused. He was standing right in front of them all. Couldn't they see him? Or didn't they realize that it was him? Beaver piped up. "I miss Henry so much." Otter agreed. "He is the heart of the forest, and a good friend to us all." Butterfly said, He has always been so kind, thoughtful, wise, and brave. Rabbit spoke. I think having 4 toes must be fun. Ferret added, I love his little nose and squiggly tail. Mouse squeaked, and the white flecks on his tummy remind me of snowflakes, soft and mischievous, just like Henry. I'm so glad he doesn't have long spikes, gasped Centipede. Long ones are so scary. Squirrel giggled. Oh, I adore the higgledy-piggledy patterns on his face. They are so special and unique. Swan continued. Crow prefers light brown hedgehogs, but I love Henry's dark brown colouring. It is so distinctive and elegant. Badger rounded off the comments. He is such an inspiration to us, always thinking about others and helping whenever he can. The forest feels, empty without him. Another tear dropped from his watery eyes and bounced unhappily on the ground, and began to be joined by the tears of all the other animals, but so many that soon pools of water began to collect. Such unhappiness was in the air that the sky too felt the pain, and rain began to plummet down. The animals closed their eyes and ran for cover, except for Henry, who felt glued to the spot. Whereas the feelings of jealousy and vanity had soaked slowly into him before, now a great sense of shame flooded him. The other animals loved him and liked him just as he was. They had noticed all the little things that were different about him, that made him Henry. They weren't put off by his stubby nose, or blotchy face, or any of his quirky features. Some liked them, some didn't, and some teased him about them. But that was all very normal. What mattered most was they had said such lovely things about how he treated others. He would have drowned in shame at that moment if many voices hadn't broken the silence, calling out in surprise, happiness, and unrestrained delight. It's Henry! Henry! It's Henry! He's come back! He's come back! The sky had cleared, the rain stopped, and the animals had begun to return to the clearing. Soon he was being hugged and tickled and rolled over by a multitude of friends who had so many questions. No one noticed the pine needles, the acorn and the acorn cup, the socks, or the various colours floating away in the water that the rain had washed from Henry's body. The raindrops had also washed away the pickly thoughts inside his head that had so bothered him, and as though sinking back into a comfortable armchair, he became himself again.